The last talk of the session is Escaping Cannibalization, Correlation Robust Pricing for Unit Demand Buyer, and it's given by Inbal Talgam-Cohen.
Okay, thanks very much. This is a joint work with Moshe Babaioff, Michal Feldman, Yannai Gonczarowski, and Lucier. So let me start with the basic but fundamental Bayesian revenue maximization setting. We have one seller and one buyer, and we have 10 items for sale. The values of the buyer for the items are distributed according to distributions f sub 1 to f sub n. Okay, and throughout, I'm going to use the picture on the right to show you what the seller knows about how the buyer's values are distributed. Okay, so f sub 1 to f sub n are known to the seller. The seller doesn't have any values himself, and he's trying to maximize revenue. So from previous work, we know that even in this simple setting, the optimal selling mechanism is very complex on multiple levels, including computationally complex. This happens even if values are independently drawn from the known distributions, and even if the buyer is additive, meaning that her value for a set of items is just the sum of values for the items, or if she's unit demand, meaning that her value for a set is the maximum value for any item in the set. Okay, so unit demand buyer is buyer with willpower, and she's only going to have one of the desserts. A big mystery in mechanism design is the following. Why is it that optimal mechanisms are very complex, whereas what you see in practice tends to be simple? One way we've been approaching this as a community is through the approximation framework, where a typical result would look like a simple mechanism is approximately optimal. We have these kinds of results for an additive buyer and also for unit demand buyer. Specifically for unit demand, the simple mechanism is arguably simple as possible, just price items, set prices for the items. Okay, but the approximation framework stops short if the values are correlated. Okay, in that case, we have actually strong impossibilities. An alternative framework is robust mechanism design. This has been advocated in recent years by Gabriel Carroll as a kind of alternative, or maybe together with approximation framework. And it can also explain simple mechanisms. Typical results would look something like a simple mechanism is the best possible when you have unknown correlation, and actually this correlation is worst case. And I'll show you an example in a minute. So here the correlation is working for us rather than against us. It helps us get the positive result. Carroll has established such a result for an additive buyer, and in this work we focus on a unit demand buyer. So here's what I mean by setting with unknown correlation. It's the same as before. Still the f sub 1 to f sub n distributions are known, but this time the values can be correlated. So the value is drawn from some correlated distribution capital F, and this capital F is unknown. Okay, some terminology. We're going to refer to f sub 1 to f sub n as the marginals. We have n marginals for the n items. And the correlated distribution F, we say it's compatible if its marginals are f sub 1 to f sub n. Okay, so again, f sub 1 to f sub n are known, but f, the correlated distribution, is unknown. It's actually worst case. So in correlation robust mechanism design, the goal is to study mechanisms whose worst case revenue guarantee across all compatible distributions is highest. We're going to call such a mechanism the best robust mechanism. What Carroll has shown for an additive buyer is the following, that the best robust mechanism is very simple. You just price each item separately at its Meyerson optimal price, okay, like you see in the picture. We know the marginal distributions. We can find out the Meyerson optimal prices for each one and set them as the prices for the items. We don't need to know the correlation for this. In fact, the best robust mechanism is correlation agnostic, meaning that it has the same expected revenue across all compatible distributions, across all correlations. And this kind of makes sense because the correlation is worst case. It's chosen worst case. So if there's something you don't know, and if you're sensitive to it, it's going to be used against you. You might as well be agnostic to it. Okay. Now, Carol's result for additive is very beautiful, and natural question is, can we get something similar for unit demand? So our research question is correlation to study correlation robust pricing for unit demand buyer. We focus on pricing, simplest selling mechanism, and for unit demand, we actually can only look at item prices. We don't need to bother with bundle prices anyway. Only one item is being bought. Okay, so in particular, the questions that interest us are consider the best robust pricing. Is it correlation agnostic? Is it somehow otherwise simple? And if not, what about approximately best robust pricing, by which I mean the pricing whose worst case revenue guarantee, again, across all compatible distributions, is approximately highest. These questions were posed and inspired by 2 recent Soto papers by Grav and Liu and by Grav and Liu and Tang. These papers, however, are not for a setting with unit demand, but other settings. Okay, so what do we find? So our results for general marginals are as follows. As a starting point, we show that the best robust pricing is not correlation agnostic. Okay, after observing this, natural follow-up question is, so let's say we're given the best robust pricing, okay, and we know the marginals, or maybe we're given any pricing P and we know the marginals as usual. What is the worst case compatible correlated distribution? Mathematically, we're trying to minimize over all capital F distributions, correlated distributions that are compatible with the marginals F sub 1 to F sub n. And what we're trying to minimize is the expected revenue from the buyer given the pricing when the buyer's value vector is drawn from F. Our first result is that the worst compatible distribution can be computed in polytime. Okay, this is if you're given pricing. What if you don't know the pricing? Okay, what if you only know the marginal and you need to find the best robust pricing, or maybe approximately best robust pricing? So mathematically, this looks like taking the expression from the previous slide and maximizing it over all possible pricings. Okay, so this becomes kind of a max-min computation. Our main result is that computing the best robust pricing is NP-hard, and in fact, it's NP-hard even for an approximately best pricing, up to an approximation factor roughly square root of n. To our knowledge, this is the first hardest result in the correlation robust framework. Okay, so now I think there's 2 directions you can take this in. First of all, this is for general marginals. What about nicer marginals? And second of all, how can we get these negative results for unit demand, whereas for an additive buyer, we have nice positive results even for general marginals. Okay, so let's start with the first question. If the marginals are have the monotone hazard rate property, they're MHR, then we show a simple correlation agnostic, approximately the best robust pricing, and the approximation factor that we get is 3.5. It's actually so simple that I'll just show it to you. You take all the items, you take the marginals, you compute the median of each one of the marginals, and you find the item with the highest median. In this case, it's item J, and set the median as its price. All other items are taken off the market by pricing them ad infinity. Okay, so it's definitely simple. And this begs the question, what about regular marginals? So we leave this as an open question, whether or not the best robust pricing or approximately best robust pricing can be computed in polynomial time. However, we do show that it's not going to be as simple as MHR. Okay, so it would require using many distinct prices even to get a good approximation. Okay, now to the second question. Why is unit demand seems so much harder than additive? Okay, what makes unit demand complex? So the answer is cannibalization. And in market strategy, this term refers to a reduction in the sales of one product as a result of introducing another product by the same producer or the same seller. Now let me show you an example of how this creates problem for a unit demand buyer. Okay, so I have here 2 items, and the value of the first item is uniform across the range 1, 2, and the values, the second item is between 100 and 100.5, also uniform. And as usual, the correlation is unknown. And I've set prices 1 and 100. So let's first start with a particular realization of the values. Let's say that the first value is 1.5 and the second one is 100.25. What is going to happen? What we'd like to happen is that the second item is bought because this is the expensive item. It will bring us a lot of money. But actually, because we have a unit demand buyer and she's going to only buy what maximizes her utility, the first item gives her utility of a half, the second one gives her utility of a quarter, and so she's always going to buy the first item, the cheaper one. Okay, so what's happening here is that at this pricing, item 1 completely cannibalizes item 2. And we don't ever get revenue from item 2 for these evaluations. This wouldn't happen with additive because an additive buyer will always will always buy both of the items because they both have positive utility. Okay. One more thing to notice in this example is that if you price carefully, you can sometimes escape cannibalization. If you took the first item off the market by pricing it at infinity, you would always get the higher revenue. Okay, now that was a particular realization of the values. Now let's see the setting in general. Value 1 is between 1 and 2. The value 2 is between 100 and 100.5. And we need to say what the correlation is. Okay, so that given this pricing, the worst case correlation will maximize the cannibalization of the second item by the first cheap item. And it's actually not hard to do in this example. And now showing what this worst case correlation is, it's maximizing the positive correlation between the values. And it's not hard to see that this correlation that is represented by the red arrows makes the utility for the first item always higher than that for the second item. And so that's always what's bought. In different examples, more generally, finding the correlation that maximizes cannibalization can be challenging, but what we show is that it's computationally tractable. Okay, all of this was given pricing. Given prices, we had the prices of 1 and 100. What if we don't know the prices? So what I want to do with the rest of my time is to take a closer look at our main result, which says that finding the best robust pricing is NP-hard. Okay, this is the theorem, the main theorem that I showed you before. And the intuition is kind of that, the correlation, it's chosen, it's worst case tailored to the pricing. So finding the pricing that best escapes cannibalization can be challenging. And this is what we make formal. So here's a bit more formally the computational problem, maximum pricing. The input to the problem is marginals, the output is the pricing. And we're trying to get the following benchmark or get close to it, and denoting the benchmark by rev star. And what we have, this red term is the expected revenue from a pricing P given a compatible distribution S, compatible with the input marginals. This is by taking the worst case correlation. So this is the robust revenue of pricing P. And then we take the superum over all prices, and this is the benchmark. And the goal, the objective, is to find the pricing so that its robust revenue reaches or approximates the benchmark rev star. You can think of this as a zero-sum game, where the row player is the seller who is choosing a pricing. The column player is an adversary who's choosing a distribution that's compatible with the given marginals. Again, what I have in the game matrix is the expected revenue. Okay, so the seller is, the pricing is basically judged based on the minimum over columns. Okay, it's worst case, it's robust revenue. And we're trying to maximize this over all rows, over all pricings. Okay, this is just to give you a visual, better idea of what's going on. We don't actually have this zero-sum game. The number of strategies is huge, right? All distributions compatible with given marginals, that's influence in many, and this is where computational complexity comes in. Okay, so to prove NP hardness, we have a reduction. Here's our reduction. We show that for small delta, as small as we'd like, if there's a polynomial time algorithm for max-min pricing that returns a pricing such that the robust revenue of the pricing approximates the benchmark up to roughly square root of n. Then there's a polynomial time algorithm for max independent sets that distinguishes between graphs with only small independent sets and graphs with a very large independent set. So the takeaway, it's unlikely that there exists a clean characterization for the best robust pricing. Okay, let me show you at a very high level kind of a rough sketch of the reduction and hopefully give you an intuition of what cannibalization has to do with independent sets. Okay, so we start with a max independent set instance. This is a graph. We have 4 nodes and 2 edges in this case. Okay, and we are going to reduce it to a max-min pricing instance, and I'm going to build this instance step by step. So the first step is to take the nodes and make them into items. And these items have values that are exponentially increasing with probabilities exponentially decreasing. So the first item has value 1 with probability 1. The second one has value 1,000 with probability 1 over 1,000. The third one may be 1,000,000 with probability 1 over 1,000,000, and so on. Okay, so before I even touch the edges, without any edges, reasonable prices seem to be 1, 1,000, 1,000,000, and so on. This would give me expected revenue of roughly one from each one of the items if they're sold independently, individually. And it turns out that there's not much the adversary can do in terms of correlation to get to lower this revenue. So without any edges, the robust revenue is approximately 4, the size of the set. Okay. Now here's how I incorporate edges. I had the edge between 1 and 2. I change the distribution of the value of the first item to also get a value of 1,000 with probability 1 over 1,000, and the other edge I treat similarly. And now I'm in danger of correlation, okay, and cannibalization as well. Sorry, I'm in danger of cannibalization through the correlation because I can correlate the high values of item 1 with 2 and the high values of item 1 with 3. And this would lower the revenue significantly. So an edge corresponds to cannibalization. So what I need to do in order to get a robust revenue guarantee is to find an independent set and price the items within it as before, and price the items outside it, kind of take them off the market. And this is why, in order to avoid cannibalization and get robust revenue guarantee, I need to identify maximum independent set in the graph. Okay, in this case, that would be robust revenue of roughly 3. Okay, I'm hiding a lot of details. Please see our paper. Let me summarize. So we've seen robust mechanism design as a framework for studying simple mechanisms alongside approximation. In the case of a unit demand buyer, it distills cannibalization as the main challenge. For a general marginal, we showed that finding the worst case correlation is tractable, but finding the best robust pricing is empty hard, even to approximate. We have positive results for MHR marginals, and we leave it open for regular marginals. Thanks very much.